Hello, everyone, and welcome to this short presentation. My name is Adrian Salian, and I'm a literary translator, and I've translated the Romanian national poet Mihai Eminescu from Romanian into English. Now, when you hear that I'm a translator, what comes to mind is that the traduttore traditore. So a translator is a traitor. This being given, I am actually quite happy that there is strong security at this exhibition, and I will not be shot. You can shoot a few photographs if you want to, but otherwise I'm okay. So I prepared a few lines, and I will go between speaking freely and reading some things. So I want to be a little more concise. National poet Mihai Eminescu, whose work encompasses every genre of poetry, as well as prose and journalism, is often described as the essence of the Romanian soul. Modern Romanian literary language is hugely indebted to him. In fact, there are few cultural icons in Romania larger than Eminescu. Only Constantin Brâncuș and George Enescu can rival him. Now, why is that? Because one is a sculptor, the other is a musician, and they employ languages that are universal. Literature, and especially poetry, needs the intermediate, the go-between cultures, which is the translator. So my short presentation will go into the, let's say, the laboratory or the kitchen, if you want, of the literary translator, a subject that is not particularly of interest for the publishers who talk between themselves at the level of business. Okay, I do not want the plosives to sound like shooting guns. Can you hear me now? Is that okay? Why is, first of all, Eminescu is late 19th century, considered Europe's last romantic poem. Why is he almost unknown in the English-speaking world? I actually dub him as the most unknown national poet in the world. To put it succinctly, it's very simple. He was not translated in extenso. The translations have been most of the time not particularly credible, and he was not advertised and popularized, promoted internationally by the cultural institutions. And I'm not talking only about contemporary Romania or the communist Romania. I'm going back all the way 100 years, and even the monarchy did not promote the poet, although he was immensely popular. There are different challenges, and I will speak about translations now, in translating the national poet. And you may be in a way interested to hear that they do not, all these things don't necessarily belong to the skill or the mechanics of translating. To sum up the characteristics of the poet in English, in Romanian, I could say that he's using simple vocabulary without being simplistic. He's using words that are of an archetypal, say, not in the sense of Jung, but if you talk about words like sea, sky, tree, love, and so on, these are universal categories, therefore translatable. However, with this rather simple vocabulary, simple, not simplistic, there is a depth of meaning that only the genius of a writer of a poem can get to those existential truths and philosophical truths that we love because it gets straight to our heart as well as to our mind. The third component is the special musicality that Eminescu has in English, because his sound is almost instantly recognizable by Romanians, very much like the music of Bach or Chopin or Mozart. It has a quality that immediately speaks to the audience. But you will be probably curious to learn that there are expectations about translating Eminescu that are different, of course, from the Romanian side versus everywhere else abroad. Since Romanians idealize the poet, and I will give you this, you go anywhere in the world. I have done this repeatedly when I present Eminescu and I recite Eminescu. You start, for Romanians, any line in a Romanian poem, and Romanians anywhere in the world will continue. I can demonstrate right now. A fost odată ca în povești. Thank you. Vreme trece, vreme vine. Okay, so the point is that because he's idealized in Romanian, people expect an instant recognition abroad in translations. Unfortunately, very few Romanians are at the level of competency in English to understand that most of the translations that have been offered are not at par with expectations. So I would liken a translator to an interpreter, to a singer. If you go on stage and you have a terrific composition and you have to sing it, but you sing off key, people can, throw eggs or cheese at you. That's it. You are going to be judged only by your deliverance, by your performance. And okay, that's very briefly what happens in terms of expectations. But why not go perhaps into the kitchen, the laboratory of translations, and see what happens in the rendition of sometimes maybe simple and clear statements in Romanian. What happened we have Romanian native translators and English native translations. Because Eminescu was considered a romantic poet, he was considered by the English people immediately translatable or rendered into those mannerisms in the style of the 18th century, which is full of funny syntax and obviously not appealing. And I think that this is a time where I could probably give you an example of Sylvia Penhurst, a poetess in the late 19th century. She was in among the followers of Bernard Shaw, and she heard about Eminescu, especially through the Emperor and Proletarian, and was enthused about some of the things that, the ideas and formulations. She used a go-between. She didn't know any Romanian, so she worked on translated material by Stefanovic. The result at times is amazing, but the language is so complicated that you'll hear a short poem, and I will give it. I'll give it to you, the Penhurst's version, and tell me what you understand. The Romanian poem is La Steaua, Onto the star. This is Penhurst's version. Onto the star that now appears so far indeed in transit, its lights would take 1,000 years to reach our vision's orbit. Okay. And happily, on its azure way through endless space eternal, yon sphere hath died, or ere its way had reached our eyes discernal. Of perished stars, the visions bright in heaven still soar ascendant. They were, ere yet we saw the light. Now dead, it shines resplendent. And so it is when love's desire in depths of night has perished. The quenched love still shines its fire, still follows that is cherished. Excuse me. So I will make a comment on the language and the choices. In any translation, rhyming the same grammatical category, like house, mouse, construction, instruction, and so on, ing forms, going, drinking, eating, and so on, are considered poor rhyming ways. If you add to that a kind of obsolete language, obsolete grammar, I do not want to analyze the grammar, but it is confusing. And while Eminescu in Romanian is so contemporary that you can follow line by line in the statement to this day, and there is nothing new. It's 150 years old almost, 140. Now listen to this version. That is mine. Okay. On to the star. 'Tis such a long way to the star rising above our shore. It took its light to come so far, thousands of years and more. It may have long died on its way into the distant blue, and only now appears its ray to shine for us. It's true. We see an icon slowly rise and climb the canopy. It lived when still unknown to eyes. We see what ceased to be. And so it is when yearning love dies in the deepest night. Its extinct flame still glows above and follows close our plight. I would say that this is really actually followable, if I can use that, by any contemporary English native speaker. It's coming back to the perception of translations, and you know that we've been talking about the 3% of books published in translation in the States. Fewer books than those in translation in prose are actually poetry books in translation. So how do you convince the audience that you have something that they may relate to? I don't know. I can tell you the fate of Luceafărul, the Legend of the Evening Star, that was very close to be really well known in the States in 1995. It was on the short list of Vantage Press with Jacqueline Onassis, the vice president, that had scheduled the Evening Star for publication in the fall of 95. Unfortunately, she died that summer. It took another 10 years for me to convince somebody that the legend should be published. Back to the kitchen, the laboratory of translation. Listen, I'm going to give you a few maybe samples of bad translation from Romanian into English. We have the flight of the Evening Star. The Evening Star is a nice fairy tale about the impossible love between a princess and the Evening Star. It's more than a fairy tale, it's a philosophical also poem, etc., etc. So finally, the Evening Star goes to his father, God, to ask for and to become a human person, because that's the condition that's set up by the princess. There's a beautiful flight with an intuition of how the beginning of the world, the beginning of space and time happened. And he goes where there's no bound or board, nor is there eye to know, and so on and so forth. He says there isn't aught, and yet is there a thirst that draws him on. A void that lingers like the depth of blind oblivion. Now, this is beautiful, metaphorical, and okay. Now, can you imagine that one translation, for instance, has this as, instead of the blind oblivion, it's like when the blind forget? How can you actually present your Romanian national poet as being our Shakespeare when the translation samples are at this level that, to me, they're not at the level of poetry or translation? I'll give you another short one, but I will go back to the idea that most people, and it's not only in Romanian, but in Romanian I was asked questions like, why did you translate that poem? Was it not, hadn't been already translated? Somebody said, you translated Eminescu, you probably know a lot of words in English. So there is such a misconception that languages are just intersections, large intersections, and you have inventories of words that you take from one language into the other, and you have the same meaning, and it conveys meaning immediately. So, how much time do we have? Okay. So, this is where our princess in the Evening Star goes to rest at night, and in the Romanian, my translation goes, and touches her with light of gold. This is the impersonation of the evening star that comes as a light. When she lies to repose, when hands at her wide bosom fold, when tender eyelids close, and from the mirror bright embrace like snow falls to her feet, on her closed eyes in tilted face that pulse with secret beat. Now listen to this. While where his rain on mirror lands and is upon her couch redrifted, it falls upon her throat and hands and on her face uplifted. This is not poetry. This is not even good translation at the level of trying to find an equivalence of meaning. Sofa has nothing to do, couch has nothing to do with poetry. On her throat is redrifted, a technical term. Face uplifted instead of turned up or looking, and so on and so forth. It pains me, and it has pained me. This book that I present to you right now was launched in Romania. It is half in Romanian, half in English, because I actually make a review of all translations done from the Evening Star by native speakers and native English speakers and Romanians. Basically what happened, to make a kind of general sum up, the Romanians felt that there is a need to keep the prosodic sound, and they tried to rhyme, and basically forcing both meaning and everything else to make ends meet, to make ends rhyme. The result was a Procrustean bed where it was like trying to fit square pegs into round holes. Impossible. It was a big disservice to the poet. Maybe of interest to some of academics. The native speakers from the beginning thought we could not render it in prosodic form, therefore we forego any sound or any rhyme, and we render it as content. Because they also didn't know Romanian well enough, even that kind of effort was at times, falling short. So, what is the solution? Before I conclude, I think that literary translation is a labor of love. You do not get rich by translating poetry, and not getting rich by going back centuries ago. Especially since Robert Bly, I make a digression. Robert Bly read my translation, and he was enthused. And he said, the only reservation I have is whether the poetry of former centuries will not fall dead on contemporary readers' ears. And that I cannot question the statement. What I can tell you is that The Evening Star was staged by an American director in 2005 and 2008 in Manhattan, the hub of the universe, the 67th Street, very close to the Met Opera. And it ran for 3 days every time as a theatrical, choreographical, musical production. So I think that there is interest. How do you translate Eminescu extensively? In my mind, only through an international collective effort, where you have to also convince poets as well as academics that against their worst fear, which is fear of rhyming. Robert Blythe said, poetry is what is lost in translation. I don't believe it. I believe that all academics translate blank poetry, as you know, with great success. They stay away from prosodic form because they fear that the ridicule. If you do something and it turns out almost like a Hallmark card, then they will fall into disrepute. So I hope that I've only touched into some, little aspects from the lab of the translator. I hope that there will be at some point a better connection between publishers and translators, and with incentives to make the sample works known to the international market, especially for a folkloric language like Romanian. This is extremely important. So I thank you for your indulgence in listening to me rambling on things 200 years old, 150 years old. Thank you so much.